Hi there, and welcome back to Haunting Veils. Tonight, we step into a world of secrets, shadows, and betrayal, as Hercule Poirot faces one of his most chilling cases yet. At the stroke of midnight, a wealthy man gathered his family to hear the reading of his final testament. But before the clock could strike 12, he collapsed, dead, with his last words trapped on the page. The inheritance was worth millions, and every heir had a reason to kill. This is the Midnight Testament, a tale of greed, lies, and a legacy written in blood. Yet, hidden inside that Midnight Testament was a clue so subtle, only Poirot could see it. Make sure to subscribe to Haunting Veils before we dive deeper into this mystery. You won't want to miss what comes next. Chapter 1: Shadows Before Midnight. The evening had fallen with a strange weight upon the sea. Though the Mediterranean was usually a place of calm, where the waters reflected stars like jewels scattered across black velvet, tonight there was a heaviness to the air. Hercule Poirot stood alone at the starboard rail of the Ariadne, the magnificent private yacht of Sir Charles Forsyth, and though to any other passenger the night might have seemed serene, to Poirot there lingered an unease. The salt breeze brushed his impeccable mustaches, and his eyes, those sharp, watchful eyes that had uncovered so many secrets others wished to keep hidden, narrowed at the horizon. It was not often that Poirot accepted invitations to gatherings of the wealthy and powerful. He preferred, in truth, the quiet comforts of his own ordered routine. But Sir Charles had been insistent, and there was a curiosity in the detective's mind. Sir Charles Forsyth was a man of legend, an empire builder whose name adorned shipping lines, railways, and banks. He was a man both respected and despised, admired for his cunning and feared for his ruthlessness. And now, on this yacht, anchored just off the coast of Cannes, he had summoned his family for a final gathering. Tomorrow, at the stroke of midnight, he was to reveal his testament, his last will, written and sealed in secrecy. Some whispered that it would shock those assembled, for Sir Charles was not a man to forgive easily. Inside the grand salon of the yacht, the air was warm with light and tension. Poirot entered, his polished shoes clicking softly against the wooden floor, and he allowed his gaze to sweep over the assembled faces. They were gathered like actors awaiting their cue, each one hiding thoughts behind carefully chosen masks. There was Richard Forsyth, the eldest son, tall and broad-shouldered, though softened by years of indulgence. His face bore the ruddy complexion of a man too often in drink, and his eyes flickered with restless irritation. At his side stood his wife, Margaret, a woman whose thin lips were pressed so tightly together it seemed she feared they might betray her if left unguarded. Seated by the piano was Helena Forsyth, the widow of Sir Charles's late younger brother. She was elegant, still beautiful despite the years, her eyes deep and knowing. She wore her jewels as though they were armor, each diamond a shield against the uncertainties of her position. Near the windows, staring out into the night, was Lillian, Sir Charles's daughter. She was young, rebellious, her short dark hair cut fashionably, her eyes filled with the defiance of a woman determined to live outside the rigid boundaries of her family's name. And then there was Edward Langley, Sir Charles's business partner of 20 years. His sharp features gave him a hawk-like aspect, and though he smiled often, Poirot sensed little warmth behind it. He was a man who had built his fortune in Sir Charles's shadow, and yet perhaps had ambitions beyond it. Hovering discreetly at the edge of the room was Miss Dawson, the secretary, a quiet, gray figure whose hands never ceased their movement, always writing, always recording. Poirot noted her pale complexion, her downcast eyes, her air of someone who saw everything yet was rarely seen herself. Sir Charles himself entered last, leaning on his cane, his great frame still imposing though weakened by age. His voice carried through the salon with the command of a general. "My family," he said, pausing to let his eyes rest on each of them. "And my associates. You wonder why I've brought you here, on this yacht, away from prying eyes. You will know soon enough. Tomorrow, at midnight, I shall read my testament, the final word of Charles Forsyth." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Poirot inclined his head politely, observing how each person reacted. Richard shifted uneasily, as though fearing that his inheritance might not be as secure as he hoped. Helena's hand closed around her necklace, her expression unreadable. Lillian smirked faintly, as if daring her father to disinherit her. And Edward Langley's smile grew ever so slightly tighter. Later, as the evening wore on, the guests sat around a long polished table in the dining room. Silverware gleamed, crystal glasses caught the candlelight, and dishes were served with the elegance befitting such a gathering. Yet beneath the refinement ran an undercurrent of tension. Conversation faltered, then resumed in bursts, always circling the subject that none dared to speak of openly, the testament. Poirot, seated midway down the table, said little, though his ears missed nothing. He noted the pointed remark Richard made about those who contribute nothing yet expect to share in the rewards. He observed the silence that followed when Lillian declared she would never be bound by the family's money. He noticed, too, how Miss Dawson's pen scratched rapidly across her notepad, capturing every word with a precision that was almost unsettling. At one moment, as the servants cleared the main course, Sir Charles leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Poirot. "You, Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice commanding attention, "you may think it odd that I have invited you here. But perhaps it is not so odd. A man such as myself makes enemies, both in business and in family. When the testament is read, there will be anger, perhaps even hatred. I wish to know that, should misfortune fall, Hercule Poirot will see the truth." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "It is always my task, monsieur, to see the truth. And the truth, it is never so simple as men imagine." A hush fell across the table. Even the candles seemed to flicker more faintly, as though wary of the words. After dinner, the guests drifted into the salon once more. Richard poured himself another glass of brandy, his movements careless, his eyes slightly glazed. Helena settled into a chair, her hands folded neatly, her expression thoughtful. Lillian played a few sharp notes on the piano before abandoning it altogether. Langley lit a cigar, the smoke curling in the lamplight. Poirot stood apart, watching, listening. The air was thick with words unsaid, with suspicions half-formed, with grievances long nurtured. It reminded him of another gathering, years before, when he had been aboard a train trapped in snow, the Orient Express. Then, too, secrets had lain heavy among the passengers, waiting to burst forth. He smiled faintly to himself. Human nature, it seemed, never changed. As midnight approached, Sir Charles retired to his cabin, escorted by Miss Dawson. The others dispersed to their rooms, though not without lingering glances, sharp words, and unspoken fears. Poirot remained on deck, the night air cool against his face. The yacht rocked gently with the swell of the sea. Above, the stars burned bright, but to Poirot they seemed to watch with the same silent judgment he himself carried within. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "There is a storm here, though not in the sky. It brews among these people, in their hearts, in their minds. And when the clock strikes tomorrow, mon Dieu, it will break." The waves lapped against the hull, a rhythm both soothing and ominous. Somewhere in the shadows of the yacht, a door closed softly. Footsteps echoed briefly, then vanished. Poirot turned his gaze toward the cabin where Sir Charles had gone, and in that instant, though no cry had yet been raised, though no tragedy had yet occurred, he knew the game had already begun. Chapter 2. the testament vanishes. The night had passed with an eerie stillness, as though the sea itself were holding its breath. Poirot slept little, lying awake in his narrow cabin, listening to the distant creaks of the yacht, the shuffle of feet on the deck, the muffled closing of doors. He was used to the noises of travel, yet tonight there was something unsettled about them, as though each sound hinted at hidden purpose. When dawn broke, it did so without splendor. The sun was pale, veiled by a thin mist that clung to the water. Poirot rose, dressed with his usual fastidiousness, and made his way above deck. A sailor greeted him with a nod, but even there, the air seemed tense. The Ariadne, though beautiful, felt less like a place of luxury and more like a stage upon which unseen actors were rehearsing some sinister play. Breakfast was served in the dining room. The family gathered once again, though now without the polish of the previous evening. Richard's eyes were bloodshot, his hand shaking slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. Lillian looked pale but defiant, her chin raised. Helena's poise was still impeccable, but Poirot detected the faintest shadow of unease beneath her composed exterior. Edward Langley was already reading the morning reports, as though the world of business could be carried even onto the sea. And Miss Dawson, ever the silent shadow, was noting down the day's details with relentless precision. Sir Charles arrived last, his cane striking firmly against the floor, his frame stooped yet still commanding. He announced with brisk authority, "Tonight, at midnight, you will all know my will. Until then, you will behave as guests aboard my yacht. There will be no quarrels, no scenes. We are Forsyths, and we conduct ourselves as such." He glanced pointedly at Richard, whose lips curled but whose words remained unspoken. Poirot ate little, his mind more occupied with watching than with dining. He noted how Helena avoided Langley's gaze, how Lillian toyed with her spoon as though her thoughts were elsewhere, how Miss Dawson's pen hesitated, just briefly, when Sir Charles spoke of the testament. The hours drifted by with agonizing slowness. The yacht remained anchored, the mist lingering, as though the world beyond had vanished. Some passed the time in reading, others in restless pacing, still others in sharp, whispered conversations. Poirot took his customary walk upon the deck, his hands folded neatly behind his back, his eyes lowered but alert. He reflected, as he often did, on the nature of human greed. A will, a testament, it was not merely a legal document. It was a mirror held up to the hearts of those who stood to inherit. It revealed not only wealth but affection, not only legacy but betrayal. It was the spark that could ignite passions long buried. As the day faded, the weather shifted. The mist thickened, the air grew heavy, and by evening, a storm pressed upon them. The sea, once calm, began to stir with uneasy waves. Inside the yacht, lamps were lit, their glow flickering against polished wood. The family assembled once more in the salon, restless, impatient. Sir Charles sat at the head of the room, the sealed envelope containing his testament placed before him on the table. At midnight, he declared, tapping the envelope with a finger, "You will hear my last words on this earth. Until then, you will wait." His pronouncement was followed by silence. The clock ticked. The storm outside lashed against the windows. Time itself seemed to slow, each minute stretching, taut with expectation. Poirot excused himself to the deck, standing beneath the shelter of the awning, watching the rain lash across the waves. He thought again of another storm, another night, aboard the Karnak, in Egypt, when death on the Nile had unmasked a crime of passion and greed. Always, he mused, wealth was both a blessing and a curse. When he returned to the salon, it was nearly midnight. The family sat rigid, every eye fixed on the envelope. Sir Charles, his hand firm upon his cane, rose to his feet. "My testament," he began, his voice steady despite the storm, contains decisions not all of you will like. But they are mine, and mine alone. You will learn them now. He reached for the envelope, and then the lights flickered. A sudden gust rattled the yacht. For an instant, darkness enveloped the room. A cry rang out, Helena's, sharp and startled. The lights returned, wavering. Sir Charles stood, his face pale, his hand upon his chest. The envelope was gone. The room erupted. Richard leapt to his feet, his voice thick with outrage. Where is it? Who has taken it? Lillian gasped, her eyes darting around wildly. Helena covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Langley stepped forward, his expression unreadable. And Miss Dawson, her notepad fallen to the floor, bent to retrieve it with shaking hands. Poirot raised his voice, commanding, precise, silence. Yes, Amos. At once. All eyes turned to him. He moved calmly to Sir Charles, who had collapsed into his chair, his breath labored. Poirot touched his wrist, then his throat. A hush fell. He is dead, Poirot said softly. The word struck like thunder. Richard staggered back, muttering disbelief. Lillian turned pale as parchment. Helena's eyes closed, her shoulders trembling. Langley's jaw tightened. Miss Dawson clutched her notepad to her chest, her knuckles white. Poirot stood, surveying them. His gaze swept the room, sharp, unyielding. Sir Charles Forsyth is dead, and the testament vanished. The storm outside howled in answer, the yacht rocking with its fury. Inside, the silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the clock. Poirot's voice, calm yet edged with steel, filled the room. This is not an accident. This is not a whim of fate. It is murder. A gasp escaped from Helena. Richard swore violently. Lillian shook her head, whispering, No, no. Poirot raised a hand for silence once more. Each of you was present. Each of you had reason. And until the truth is revealed, no one will leave this yacht. The storm outside, it keeps us bound together. And so, Mies Amos, we shall see which among you has woven this web of deceit. The yacht groaned against the waves, its timbers shuddering. The lamps flickered once more, their light throwing shadows against the faces of the gathered. Shadows of fear, shadows of guilt, shadows that told Poirot more than words ever could. He turned to the body of Sir Charles, his eyes softening, just briefly, with something almost like pity. A strong man, undone not by age, but by the hand of another. Then his gaze lifted, keen as a blade. And by dawn, we shall begin. The family stood frozen, their world shattered. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, suspicion festered. The testament had vanished. The patriarch was dead. And Hercule Poirot knew this was only the beginning. Chapter 3, Echoes of Betrayal. The storm did not abate with dawn. Instead, it grew fiercer, the sea lashing against the hull of the Ariadne with relentless fury. Curtains of rain blurred the horizon, and the sky hung low, a churning mass of gray. Within the yacht, the air was thick, stifling not from heat but from fear. Sir Charles Forsyth lay in the small cabin where his body had been moved during the night, a sheet drawn over his face. His death had left the yacht adrift in more ways than one. The testament had vanished. The patriarch was gone. What remained was suspicion, cold, poisonous, and unrelenting. Hercule Poirot sat in the salon, immaculate as ever despite the tumult around him. His shoes gleamed. His tie was perfectly aligned. Yet his eyes were weary, though not from fatigue, rather from the weight of what he had witnessed countless times before. The corrosion of trust, the collapse of facades, the exposure of what lay hidden in the human soul. One by one, they entered, the heirs, the widow, the partner, the secretary. Their faces bore the marks of a sleepless night, and though each attempted composure, Poirot saw through the mask. For Hercule Poirot always saw. He rose, his small figure commanding despite his modest height. Mess Amos, he said, his voice calm, yet heavy with authority. "We find ourselves in most grave circumstances. Sir Charles Forsyth is dead. His testament has been stolen. We are cut off from the world by this storm. And so, until it passes, we are together, alone and without escape." Richard Forsyth bristled, his fists clenching at his sides. "Then question us, Poirot, if you must. But don't waste time with speeches. My father is dead, and I will have the truth." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Patience, Monsieur Richard. The truth is not so easily seized. It must be drawn forth delicately, like a thread from a tapestry. Let us begin." He gestured for them to sit. Reluctantly, they did, Richard slumping into a chair, his wife Margaret hovering close at his side, Helena poised with elegance but pale beneath her jewels, Lillian crossing her arms, her chin high in defiance, Edward Langley smoothing his cuffs with an air of practiced calm, and Miss Dawson quiet, her notepad already open, her pen trembling slightly between her fingers. Poirot began with Richard. "Tell me, monsieur, what did you observe when the lights flickered last night?" Richard scowled. "I saw nothing. One moment the envelope was there, the next it was gone. Perhaps you should be asking Langley. He was closest." Langley lifted his brow, unruffled. "And you, Richard, were closest to your father. Yet you did not prevent his death." Richard surged forward, but Poirot raised a hand. "Gentlemen, restraint. We seek clarity, not quarrel. Monsieur Richard, you were not fond of your father, were you not?" Richard's eyes hardened. He judged me. Always. Whatever I did, it was never enough. But I did not kill him, Poirot. I swear it. Poirot tilted his head. "You swear it now. Yet it is the habit of murderers also to swear their innocence." He paused, then shifted his gaze. "Madame Helena, your turn." Helena adjusted her necklace, her voice measured. "I saw nothing either. The lights, darkness, chaos. And then he was gone. You grieved, yes?" Poirot's eyes were sharp. Her eyes flickered. "Of course I grieved. Charles was my brother-in-law. He provided for me after my husband's death. Without him, I would have been destitute." Poirot leaned closer. "And without his will, perhaps you fear you shall be so again." Her hand tightened on her necklace, but she said nothing. Poirot turned next to Lillian. "Mademoiselle, you seemed unmoved last night." Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "Unmoved? Perhaps. You think me cold, Monsieur Poirot. But my father and I, we were never friends. He disapproved of my life, my choices, my freedom. If his will had nothing for me, so be it. I would not beg for his scraps." Poirot's eyes softened, though his voice remained firm. "And yet even those who scorn wealth may be tempted by it." Her jaw tightened, but she said no more. Poirot shifted to Langley. "Monsieur Langley, you were Sir Charles's partner. You knew his business affairs better than any. Tell me, had there been quarrels?" Langley smiled thinly. "Quarrels? Naturally. Charles was a difficult man, but we respected one another. I had no reason to wish him dead. In fact, his death will complicate matters greatly for me. As for the testament, what concern is it of mine? I am no heir." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "But perhaps you feared what it contained. A clause, perhaps, revealing some truth you would rather remain hidden." Langley's smile faltered, but only briefly. "You are reaching, Poirot." And yet, Poirot murmured, "One reaches, and sometimes one finds." Finally, Poirot's gaze settled on Miss Dawson. She sat rigid, her eyes downcast, her pen scratching notes despite the tremor in her hand. "Miss Dawson," Poirot said gently, "you were closest to Sir Charles in his daily life. You knew his words, his moods, his confidences. Did he speak of this testament to you?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Her face flushed, her eyes darted quickly to Richard, then to Helena, then back to her notepad. At last, in a voice scarcely audible, she whispered, "He said it would change everything." The room stirred at her words. Richard muttered an oath. Helena's breath caught. Lillian leaned forward, her eyes alight with sudden interest. Poirot nodded slowly. Yes, change everything. And now it is gone. He paced the room, his steps measured, his gaze unfocused yet penetrating. He spoke softly, almost to himself. It is always thus. A testament is not only a matter of inheritance. It is a confession of a life. It declares love or withholds it. It bestows reward or delivers punishment. And those who fear its words, they act. They deceive. They betray. He stopped, turning back to them, his eyes flashing. One of you took that envelope. One of you struck down Sir Charles. And you think that in this storm, in this isolation, you can conceal the truth. But Hercule Poirot will find it. Always, always, the truth rises, like oil upon water. The storm howled outside, shaking the yacht, as though nature itself gave voice to his words. There followed silence. No one moved, no one spoke. Each sat wrapped in their own fear, their own suspicion. Poirot let the silence linger, heavy and oppressive, before he spoke again. Tomorrow, yes, Amos, I will begin my inquiries in earnest. I will search this yacht, every cabin, every corner. I will ask you questions, many questions. And in your answers, in your silences, I will hear the truth. He paused, his eyes sweeping over them. For already, I know this. It was no stranger who struck Sir Charles down. It was one who knew him well. One who stood in this very room last night as the lights flickered. One who thought themselves clever. His voice lowered, soft, ominous. But Hercule Poirot, he is cleverer still. The clock ticked. The storm roared. And in the salon of the Ariadne, suspicion deepened, an echo of betrayal in every glance, in every silence, in every heartbeat. Chapter 4. Masks of the Guilty. The morning brought no relief. The storm still prowled outside the yacht, though its fury had lessened to a steady roar. The sea remained restless, the horizon a blur of gray and silver. Within the Ariadne, however, the air was sharper, colder, filled with an invisible pressure that weighed heavily upon all who breathed it. The salon had become their prison. The velvet chairs and mahogany table, once symbols of comfort and wealth, now seemed hostile, too close, too confining. The lamps burned all through the night, but their golden glow could not banish the darkness in each heart. Poirot entered quietly, his small frame impeccable as ever, every button fastened, every line of his attire precise. If the storm had unsettled him, he gave no sign. His mustaches, waxed and perfect, glistened faintly in the lamplight. But his eyes were sharp as blades, restless as the sea beyond the portholes. He clasped his hands. "Mess Amos," he began, his voice even, "you have had the night to consider, to reflect, perhaps also to fear. Today we begin, and today Hercule Poirot will strip away the masks you wear." Helena stirred uncomfortably. Lillian folded her arms, her chin defiantly high. Richard scowled, his wife Margaret clutching his arm nervously. Langley sat back, composed but watchful. And Miss Dawson's eyes were downcast. Her notepad before her, though she had yet to touch her pen. Poirot looked at them all. It is human, is it not, to wear a mask? The mask of civility, the mask of affection, the mask of loyalty. But when murder intrudes, the mask begins to slip. The lies unravel. The truth, it pushes through like sunlight through the clouds. He paused deliberately, letting the silence grow, then turned sharply. "Monsieur Langley, come." Edward Langley rose, reluctant but with practiced dignity. Poirot led him to the long mahogany table. On its surface rested a small black box. Poirot opened it with ceremony, revealing slips of paper and a deck of playing cards. "Ah," Langley muttered, with a trace of sarcasm. "A magician's trick, Poirot." Poirot's mustache twitched. But of course, and like all tricks, it reveals more than it conceals. Please, monsieur, take a card. Langley frowned but complied, drawing one. Poirot's eyes followed every gesture. Read it aloud, if you please. Langley cleared his throat. Where were you? Precisely when the lights flickered. A murmur ran through the group. Langley gave a tight smile. This again. Oui, Poirot said softly. But now, you answer with all eyes upon you. Langley hesitated. Then, I was at the far end of the table. I reached for the decanter to pour myself another drink when the darkness came. I heard movement, confusion, and then light returned. That is all. Poirot stepped closer. Yet your sleeve, monsieur. Yesterday, I noted a faint tear near the cuff. It is clumsily mended. Might I ask, did it catch on something perhaps in the dark? Perhaps upon the drawer of the desk where the testament had been placed. Langley's composure faltered. I caught it earlier. In my cabin. Earlier, you say. And yet, Poirot's eyes glinted. I examined your cabin this morning. The drawer of your bedside table, fresh splinters of wood, and a single dark thread. Langley stiffened. You searched my cabin? Naturellement, Poirot replied, spreading his hands. Murder does not wait politely for permission. The others whispered. Richard leaned forward, his eyes blazing with triumph. So it was him. I knew it. Poirot raised a hand. Nah, monsieur. Do not rush to judgment. The evidence suggests movement in the dark. Yes, but whether that movement was theft or panic or something else entirely, we do not yet know. Langley returned to his seat, pale but composed once more. Poirot turned next to Helena. Madame Helena, he said gently. Please, draw a card. Her fingers trembled slightly as she chose one. She read aloud. What did you fear when the testament was to be read? Her eyes flickered, her lips parting. For a moment she said nothing. Then, with sudden sharpness, I feared nothing. Why should I fear my brother-in-law's will? He was generous to me, always. Poirot tilted his head. And yet, your jewels. Ah, they are lovely but costly. More costly than your allowance, perhaps. Her face flushed. Charles gave me gifts. You would call them excessive. I call them kind. Poirot's gaze did not waver. But kindness can be withdrawn. A testament can reveal not gifts, but debts. Not generosity, but betrayal. Helena's eyes shone with sudden tears. You dare. Not dare, madam, Poirot said softly. Merely observe. She turned away, trembling, and Margaret rushed to her side with whispered comforts. Next, it was Lillian's turn. She drew her card. Her voice rang clear, defiant. What did you hope the testament would not contain? A silence followed. Lillian's eyes burned with intensity. Hope? I hoped nothing. My father despised me. I knew well enough he would leave me nothing. Perhaps I even wished it so, to be free of his judgment forever. Poirot stepped closer. And yet, mademoiselle, your cabin too revealed a clue. A cigarette case gold, engraved. Not yours, I think, for it bears the initials CF. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. He gave it to me. Once. Long ago. Poirot's mustache twitched. Or perhaps you took it, last night, as you reached for the testament? A souvenir from a father you hated? Her breath caught, but she laughed coldly. You twist everything, Poirot. If I wished him dead, I would not need to steal a trinket to prove it. Poirot said nothing, but his silence was louder than accusation. At last, his gaze moved to Richard. Richard's jaw tightened as he drew a card. His voice was rough. What did you stand to gain? The room froze, all eyes fixed on him. Richard glared at Poirot, then at the others. Everything, he spat. I was his son, his only son. Of course I would gain everything. But does that make me a murderer? Or does it simply make me the most convenient scapegoat? Poirot's gaze did not soften. Convenient, yes, but not necessarily guilty. You see, Monsieur Richard, too obvious a motive can sometimes be the mask behind which another hides. Richard blinked, startled, his anger momentarily checked. Poirot moved on. Finally, Poirot turned to Miss Dawson. She drew a card, her hands trembling. She read, "What secret did Sir Charles entrust to you?" Her breath faltered. The pen slipped from her fingers. She looked at Poirot, her lips trembling. I cannot." "You can," Poirot said softly. "And you must." Her eyes filled with tears. "He told me. The testament, it would expose not only his wishes but a betrayal. A betrayal within the family. He did not say who, only that when it was read, the truth would come." Gasps filled the room. Margaret clutched Richard's arm tighter. Helena's face paled. Lillian's eyes blazed. Langley sat rigid, his jaw clenched. Poirot closed the black box with finality. "There, the game is played. The cards are drawn. The masks, they slip further with each revelation." He straightened, his voice hardening. "One of you struck down Sir Charles. One of you feared the testament, and so you stole it. Already, I see the shape of the truth. Already, I sense the guilty heart. But not yet, MES Amos. Not yet. The storm must pass. The pieces must fall. And then Hercule Poirot will reveal all." The lamps flickered. The sea thundered. And in that salon, the silence was heavier than the storm outside. Each of them trapped, each of them wearing a mask that was cracking piece by piece. Chapter 5. The Final Confession. The storm began to ease. Not swiftly, not mercifully, but with the slow relentlessness of a predator that is fed and now drifts back into the shadows. By afternoon, the rain softened, the winds lessened, and pale light began to filter through the portholes of the Ariadne. Yet within the salon, the air was darker than ever. Hercule Poirot had summoned them all. The heirs, the widow, the partner, the secretary, every soul bound to the dead man by blood, by love, or by ambition. They gathered in uneasy silence, the weight of expectation pressing down upon them like a stone. Poirot stood before them, his small frame perfectly upright, his hands clasped neatly before him. His attire was immaculate, as though not a single drop of salt or storm had dared touch him. Yet his eyes were alive, bright with certainty, with fire. "Mess Amos," he began, his voice measured, deliberate, every syllable falling like the tick of a clock. "It is time. The hour has come for truth. The masquerade, it ends." No one moved. No one breathed. Poirot continued. "Sir Charles Forsyth is dead. His testament has vanished. These two facts are not accidents, nor are they separate. None. They are bound together, cause and effect. For the testament held the key, the danger, the spark that ignited murder. And so, we must ask, who among you had cause to fear its words?" He turned, pacing slowly, each step echoing in the silence. "Monsieur Richard, the dutiful son. You, perhaps, fear disinheritance? But none. Too obvious. Too crude. You quarreled, yes, but you were his blood. Sir Charles was proud, harsh, but not cruel enough to cut you away entirely." Richard exhaled sharply, relief mingled with bitterness. Margaret clutched his hand. Poirot shifted his gaze. "Madame Helena, adorned in jewels too fine for your allowance. You feared, perhaps, exposure, that Sir Charles had been more than generous, that he had indulged beyond propriety. But no, madam, though the will may have tightened your purse, it would not have destroyed you." Helena's lips trembled, but she said nothing. "Then we have Mademoiselle Lillian, the daughter estranged, the spirit untamed. You feared nothing, you claimed. And in that, I believe you spoke the truth. You did not expect kindness, nor did you seek it, to kill for wealth, when you had already rejected it. Non, it was not you." Lillian's defiance softened, her eyes glistening despite herself. "And so, Monsieur Langley, the partner, the trusted associate, you feared, did you not, that Sir Charles's testament contained revelations not of inheritance, but of business? Perhaps, Misdeeds, embezzlements, betrayals of trust? You had reason. And you moved in the dark. You tore your sleeve. You reached for the desk. But Poirot's mustache twitched. It was not the testament you stole. It was panic you carried in your hands. Panic, not murder. Langley's jaw clenched, his composure cracking. Poirot stopped pacing. He turned slowly, deliberately, until his eyes fixed upon the quiet figure at the edge of the room. Which leaves us, infant, with you. Miss Dawson. A shiver passed through the salon. Miss Dawson's eyes widened, her hands trembling violently upon her notepad. Poirot's voice softened, yet each word cut like a blade. You, who knew his words. You, who took his dictation, who guarded his secrets. You, to whom he confided that his testament would change everything. And it would have, because in it, Sir Charles declared what no one here wished to hear, that his fortune, his empire, would not pass to family, nor to partner, but to you. Gasps broke the silence. Helena's hand flew to her mouth. Richard half rose from his chair, stunned. Lillian's eyes blazed with shock. Poirot raised a finger. Yes, mes amis, to Miss Dawson. She, who had served him faithfully for 20 years. She, who knew his mind, his business, his very soul. Sir Charles, in his heart, trusted her above all others. The testament, it was a scandal waiting to erupt, and Miss Dawson knew it. She knew what fury, what hatred, what danger it would unleash. And so, when the lights flickered, when the confusion reigned, she acted. She struck him down. She took the testament. She sought to protect herself from what she feared most. Not wealth, not inheritance, but destruction at your hands. All eyes turned to her. She shook her head violently, her voice breaking. No, it's not true. I loved him. I serve him Poirot stepped closer, his eyes burning. And it is because you loved him, mademoiselle, that the act became twisted. You feared not for yourself alone, but for his name, his legacy. You believed the family would destroy him if they learned his final wish. And so, you destroyed him instead. Tell me it is not so. Tears spilled down her face. She collapsed in her chair, her sobs racking the silence. At last, her voice came, broken, shuddering. He wanted to leave it all to me. But I told him no, it was madness. It would ruin everything. He refused to listen. Last night, when he placed the testament in the desk, I knew it was the end. They would tear me apart, call me a thief, a temptress. I only meant to take it, to burn it, to spare him the shame. But when he caught my hand, when he tried to stop me, I struck him. I did not mean to kill. Her voice dissolved into sobs. Silence followed, broken only by the fading rumble of the sea. The family sat stunned, their masks stripped away, their rivalries momentarily silenced by the starkness of truth. Poirot closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, calm once more. So, it is the Midnight Testament, meant to bind, it has instead destroyed. Such is the folly of pride, of secrecy, of fear. He turned to the others. You see, Miss Amos, it is never the will itself that brings tragedy, but the passions it awakens, the resentments, the betrayals, the illusions. Wealth, power, love, these are but masks, and behind them, always the human heart. He bowed his head slightly. Hercule Poirot has spoken. The storm lifted fully by evening. The sea grew calmer. The authorities would soon arrive. But within the salon, none spoke further. They sat in silence, each alone with their thoughts, their grief, their guilt. The testament was gone. Sir Charles was gone. But the echoes of betrayal lingered, etched forever into their hearts. Poirot stood once more by the window, gazing at the horizon. His reflection in the glass was precise, immaculate, untouchable. Yet within, he felt the weight of yet another tragedy solved too late to prevent the crime. The order restored, but only after the chaos of death. And so ends A Midnight Testament, a Hercule Poirot mystery. A tale of pride, betrayal, and the masks we wear until truth rips them away. If you wish to step again into the world of Hercule Poirot, where no secret remains hidden, where every deception is uncovered, then stay with us. For another mystery always awaits. Another crime demands its answer. Another heart hides its shadow. Subscribe now, and let the little gray cells guide you once more until the next case unfolds. Take care, and beware, for in the quiet of midnight, truth is never far behind.